The year was 1876, a time when the vast, unyielding plains of the West were stained with suspicion and the blood of colliding worlds. The wind, a constant unseen presence, whispered tales of hardship and fleeting beauty across the immense canvas of the land, a land that held its breath, waiting. For Clara Prescott, the daughter of a stern rancher whose holdings stretched as far as the eye could see, this wind often felt like the only confidant to her quiet yearnings. Her days were a carefully stitched tapestry of duty, mending clothes until her fingers ached, tending the small vegetable garden that was her only true domain, and ensuring her father's house ran with an order that belied the turbulence often simmering beneath its surface. Arthur Prescott was a man carved from the same unforgiving granite as the distant mountains, his heart hardened by loss, his wife taken by fever years ago, and by the relentless struggle to tame a land that resisted every effort. He saw the world in stark shades of black and white, and the native peoples, whose ancestral lands his ranch now encompassed, were a shadow he wished to erase. Clara, with her mother's gentle eyes and a spirit more attuned to the subtle hues of a prairie sunset than the harsh glare of her father's pronouncements, felt the constraints of her life like a too-tight corset. She was expected to be dutiful, obedient, and eventually the wife of a man like Walter Vance, a neighboring rancher's son whose gaze held a possessive glint, she found deeply unsettling. Love, in her father's estimation, was a practical arrangement, a merging of land and influence, not the flutterings of a young woman's heart. So, Clara moved through her days with a surface calm, her true thoughts and desires hidden deep within, like wildflowers struggling for light in a shadowed ravine. Her loneliness was a quiet companion, a familiar ache that intensified with each passing year, each new restriction her father imposed in the name of safety and propriety. She longed for something more, a connection that transcended the barbed wire fences of her existence, a whisper of understanding in the echoing silence of her world. Miles away, lost in the labyrinthine folds of the same unforgiving land, Chayton moved like a ghost. His people, the Lakota, were scattered, their ancestral grounds increasingly encroached upon, their way of life under siege. A recent skirmish, a brutal, one-sided affair, had left him wounded, separated from his kin. Pain was a constant thrum beneath his skin, a burning fire in his side where a soldier's bullet had grazed him, and a deeper, colder ache in his heart for the faces he might never see again. Each sunrise was a testament to his resilience, each sunset a reminder of his isolation. Distrust was his shield, forged in the fires of broken treaties and unprovoked aggression. The Wasatchew, the white settlers, were a force of nature to him, like a blizzard or a wildfire, consuming everything in their path. Survival was his only creed now, his senses honed to the slightest rustle of leaves, the faintest scent on the wind. He was a hunter, but also the hunted, adrift in a world that no longer felt like home. It was on an afternoon heavy with the scent of approaching rain, the sky bruised into shades of purple and gray, that Clara ventured further than usual from the ranch. She had told her father she was searching for strayed calves, but in truth, she sought the solace of solitude, a brief respite from the suffocating presence of Walter Vance, who had spent the morning outlining his plans for their presumed future. She guided her mare, Daisy, along a little-used game trail that led to a small creek, its banks choked with willows and cottonwoods. The air was still, expectant. As she dismounted to let Daisy drink, a flicker of movement in the dense undergrowth caught her eye. It was not the familiar scurry of a rabbit or the startled flight of a quail. This was different, larger. Her heart leaped into her throat, a frantic bird beating against her ribs. Her father's warnings, vivid and terrifying, about hostiles echoed in her mind. She should turn, flee, ride back to the safety of the ranch house and raise the alarm. But something held her rooted to the spot, a morbid curiosity perhaps, or a deeper, unacknowledged defiance of the fear that was meant to govern her every move. Slowly, cautiously, she parted the willows. He lay half-concealed by the tall grass, his dark hair matted with sweat and dirt, his buckskin clothing torn and stained. One arm was flung out, the hand clenched in the earth, the other pressed tightly to his side. His face, sharp-featured and etched with pain, was turned away from her, but she could see the shallow, ragged rise and fall of his chest. He was Lakota, the beading on his moccasins, though soiled, was unmistakable. He was an enemy, according to her father, according to everyone she knew. Yet as she looked at him, lying broken and vulnerable, the carefully constructed walls of prejudice her upbringing had erected began to tremble. This was not the fearsome savage of her father's tales. This was a man, grievously injured and alone. Clara's breath hitched. The wind soughed through the cottonwoods, a mournful sound. She could hear her father's voice, harsh and unforgiving. "Leave him be, girl. It's God's will if he dies. One less of them to worry about." But then, another voice, softer, almost forgotten, her mother's, whispered of kindness, of compassion for all living things. The conflict tore at her. To help him was to risk everything: her father's wrath, the condemnation of their small community, perhaps even her own safety if this man, should he recover, proved to be hostile. To leave him was to betray something fundamental within herself, something that recoiled from the cold calculus of her father's world. Rain began to fall, fat, cold drops splattering on the leaves around them. He stirred, a low groan escaping his lips. His eyes, dark and glazed with fever, flickered open, trying to focus. For a heartbeat, their gazes met, and in that instant, Clara saw not an enemy, but a human being in desperate need. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like an imperative. She couldn't leave him. With strength she didn't know she possessed, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear and resolve, Clara managed to get Chayton to his feet. He was heavier than he looked and leaned on her, his breath hot against her neck. The disused line shack her grandfather had built years ago, nestled in a small hidden hollow a mile further from the main ranch, came to mind. It was dilapidated but offered shelter. The journey was a blur of whispered encouragements, Chayton's grunts of pain, and the slick mud that threatened to send them sprawling with every step. She half dragged, half carried him, her muscles screaming in protest, her mind racing with the potential consequences of her actions. By the time they reached the shack, dusk was bleeding into night, and the rain had become a relentless downpour. Inside, the shack was small, musty, and dark. It smelled of damp earth and decay, but it was dry. Clara eased Chayton onto a rickety cot that stood against one wall, its straw-filled mattress long since rotted away, leaving only the rough wooden slats. He collapsed onto it, his body trembling. She found an old moth-eaten blanket tucked into a corner and spread it over him. There was no fireplace, no way to make a fire without attracting attention. Cold and dampness would be their companions. For the next few days, Clara lived a secret, double life. By day she performed her duties at the ranch, forcing smiles and feigning normalcy, her ears constantly straining for any sign that her absences had been noted. By night, or under the pretext of other errands, she would slip away to the line shack, carrying stolen food, a piece of bread, some leftover stew, a precious apple, and water from the creek. She found some old linen strips her mother had once used for bandages, and, after cleaning his wound as best she could with water boiled over a tiny, carefully concealed fire some distance from the shack, she dressed it. The gash in his side was deep and inflamed, hot to the touch. Fever consumed him. Chayton remained mostly delirious, muttering in a language she didn't understand, his eyes vacant. During these times, he was less a threat, more a patient. She spoke to him softly, not knowing if he heard, her words simple comforts. "You need to drink this. The fever will break soon." When he was lucid, his gaze was intense, wary, following her every move. He refused food at first, suspicion etched on his face, but thirst and hunger eventually wore him down. He ate slowly, deliberately, never taking his eyes off her. Silence hung heavy between them, punctuated only by the sounds of his labored breathing or her quiet movements. She was acutely aware of him as a man, of the lean strength in his frame, now weakened by injury, of the untamed quality that even fever could not entirely extinguish. He was, in every way, the forbidden other. One evening, as she spooned a little broth between his lips, his hand shot out, surprisingly strong, and clamped around her wrist. Clara froze, her heart hammering. His eyes, though still clouded with fever, were focused, sharp. "Why?" he rasped, the single English word hoarse and difficult. Clara swallowed, her own voice barely a whisper. "You were hurt. I couldn't just leave you." He searched her face, his grip unrelenting. Then, as suddenly as he had seized her, he released her wrist, his gaze dropping. He said nothing more that night, but a subtle shift had occurred. The absolute wall of his mistrust had shown its first tiny crack. Slowly, painstakingly, Chayton began to mend. The fever broke, leaving him weak but lucid. The wound in his side, under Clara's diligent if unskilled care, began to look less angry. He started to sit up for short periods, his back against the rough wall of the shack. The silence between them remained, but it was no longer entirely fraught with suspicion. It became a space of observation, of unspoken questions. Clara would bring her mending to the shack, her needle moving rhythmically as she sat on an upturned bucket, keeping a watchful eye on him. He in turn watched her, his expression unreadable. One afternoon she brought a small piece of jerky she'd managed to pilfer. As he ate it, slowly, methodically, she found herself speaking, her voice soft, hesitant. "My father. He wouldn't understand this. He believes all your people are hostile." Chayton's dark eyes met hers. He chewed for a moment, then swallowed. "Some of your people," he said, his voice stronger now, though still rough, "killed many of mine, women, children, for no reason." The words were flat, devoid of emotion, yet they carried the weight of immense sorrow and anger. Clara flinched. She had heard stories, of course, sanitized versions told from the settler's perspective, of necessary actions to secure the land. But his words painted a different, brutal picture. I am sorry," she stammered, the inadequacy of the words hanging in the air. He merely looked at her, his gaze unwavering. He did not absolve her or her people, he simply stated a truth. As days turned into a week, then, too, a fragile routine settled upon them. Clara continued her clandestine visits. Chayton, as his strength returned, began to move around the small shack. He was restless, like a caged hawk. He started to whittle small figures from pieces of scrap wood she brought him. A bird, a running wolf, his hands deft and sure. He offered one to her, a tiny, perfectly formed prairie falcon. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his, a spark of unexpected warmth passing between them. They began to talk more, in hesitant, broken sentences. He told her his name, Chayton, which meant falcon in his tongue. She told him about her mother, about her love for the wildflowers that bloomed in the spring. He spoke of the vastness of the plains as they once were, teeming with buffalo, a sacred land. She spoke of her feeling of being trapped, of her father's unyielding expectations. They were from different worlds, their lives shaped by opposing forces, yet in the confines of that dilapidated shack, they found small patches of common ground, a shared appreciation for the beauty of the land, a mutual understanding of loss, a nascent respect for the other's quiet strength. Clara found herself looking forward to their encounters, to the intensity of Chayton's gaze, to the rare, fleeting moments when a hint of a smile touched his lips. He was unlike any man she had ever known, proud, resilient, with a quiet dignity that even his current predicament could not diminish. She saw not the savage of her father's rants, but a man of deep feeling, a man whose spirit, though wounded, remained unbroken. Chayton, in turn, observed Clara. He saw the kindness in her eyes, the courage it took for her to defy her family and her society to help him. She was not like the other Wasichu women he had encountered, shrill, fearful, or contemptuous. There was a gentleness about her, a quiet sorrow that resonated with his own. He began to see past the pale skin and the strange clothes, to the spirit within. She was saving his life, and in doing so, she was chipping away at the fortress of bitterness he had built around his heart. The precarious peace of their hidden world, however, could not last. Arthur Prescott was a man who noticed discrepancies. He had become increasingly agitated by reports of Lakota warriors being sighted further south, closer to his lands. His questions about Clara's solitary rides became more pointed. "There's talk of renegades, Clara," he'd said one evening, his voice tight. "No daughter of mine will be wandering about unprotected." Walter Vance, too, was becoming a more persistent presence. He seemed to take Arthur's concerns as a personal mandate to watch over Clara, his attentions growing more possessive. He would often appear unannounced when Clara was preparing to check the fences near the old line shack. "Just making sure you're safe, Clara Belle," he'd say, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Clara felt his gaze on her, assessing, suspicious. One afternoon, Caleb, the oldest and most trusted ranch hand, a man who had known Clara since she was a child, approached Arthur, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mr. Prescott," he began hesitantly, "I ain't one to stir trouble, but I seen smoke a few times, thin as a whisper, up near that old line shack in the hollow. And Miss Clara, she seems to be favoring that direction a lot lately when she rides out." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "Smoke, you say?" That evening, Arthur confronted Clara. "Caleb tells me he's seen smoke near the old shack. What do you know about that, girl?" Clara's blood ran cold. She forced a casual shrug. "Smoke? Perhaps some drifters, Papa. I haven't been that far out in days." It was a weak lie, and she knew it. Arthur's gaze was like flint. "See that you stay closer to home, and Walter will be accompanying you if you have reason to ride out beyond the home pasture. These are dangerous times." The net was tightening. Clara warned Chayton. "My father suspects something. We have to be more careful." The fear was a constant knot in her stomach. Chayton, now almost fully healed, understood. He knew his presence put her in terrible danger. He had spoken of leaving, of trying to find his people, but the thought of his departure now filled Clara with a profound and unexpected dread. The connection between them, forged in secrecy and shared vulnerability, had deepened into something she dared not name. One day, Chayton was outside the shack, stretching his limbs in a small, sun-dappled clearing, when he heard the distinct sound of approaching horses, more than one. He moved with lightning speed back into the shadows of the shack, grabbing the hunting knife Clara had managed to smuggle to him. Clara, who had just arrived with a small parcel of food, paled. "Someone's coming," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. It was Walter Vance, accompanied by two of his own ranch hands. He had clearly been tracking her. He reined in his horse at the edge of the clearing, his eyes sweeping over the dilapidated shack. "Clara, what in blazes are you doing out here?" His voice was sharp with suspicion. Before Clara could answer, Vance's gaze fell upon a freshly carved piece of wood Chayton had accidentally left near the doorway, a small, intricately detailed feather. Vance dismounted, his expression hardening. "What's this?" he demanded, picking it up. "This ain't your handiwork, Clara." Clara's mind raced. "It's nothing, Walter, just an old carving I found." Vance wasn't buying it. His eyes narrowed, then darted towards the shack. "Someone in there?" he barked, moving towards the door. "No, Walter, stop," Clara cried, trying to block his path, but he roughly pushed her aside. At that moment, Chayton stepped out of the shack, standing tall and straight, the knife held loosely at his side. He positioned himself slightly in front of Clara, a silent protector. His face was a mask of stoic resolve, but his eyes, fixed on Vance, burned with a dangerous light. Vance recoiled as if struck. "An Indian," he spat, his hand instinctively going to the pistol holstered at his hip. "I knew it. You've been harboring a savage, Clara." His two hands fumbled for their own weapons. "He's not a savage," Clara cried, her voice ringing with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She stepped forward, placing herself between Chayton and Vance's drawn gun. "He was injured. I helped him. He means no harm." "Get out of the way, Clara," Vance snarled, his face contorted with rage and jealousy. "He's a murdering renegade, just like the rest of them." Just then more riders thundered into the clearing. It was Arthur Prescott, Caleb, and several other armed ranch hands. Arthur had clearly followed Vance, or perhaps Caleb had alerted him to Vance's departure. His face was thunderous as he took in the scene, his daughter defending a Lakota warrior, Vance and his men with guns drawn. "Clara, what is the meaning of this?" Arthur roared, his voice cracking like a whip. He dismounted, his rifle already in his hands. His eyes, cold and hard, fixed on Chayton. "So, this is what you've been hiding, a redskin." The word was an epithet, filled with generations of hatred and fear. "Papa, please," Clara implored, her gaze shifting to her father, her hands outstretched in a desperate plea. "He was hurt. He would have died. I only did what was right." "Right?" Arthur scoffed, his face purpling with anger. "Harboring an enemy of your people, bringing him onto my land? Have you lost your senses, girl?" He gestured with his rifle. "Step aside, Clara." But Clara stood firm, her small frame trembling but unyielding. "No, Papa, you don't understand. He is not what you think. He is a good man." He has shown me kindness." Her voice choked, but she pressed on, tears streaming down her face. "If you harm him, you will have to go through me." A stunned silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the nervous stamping of horses and the harsh breathing of the men. Arthur looked at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, no longer a child, but a woman, defiant and resolute. Walter Vance looked murderous, his pride wounded, his authority challenged. Chayton watched Clara, a profound emotion washing over him. Her courage, her unwavering defense of him in the face of such overwhelming hostility, struck him to the core. He had seen bravery in battle, the fierce loyalty of warriors, but this was a different kind of strength, a quiet resilience that shone brighter than any weapon. He slowly raised his empty hands, palms open, in a gesture of peace. "She speaks truth," he said, his voice calm and clear, his English surprisingly steady. "I was wounded. She saved my life. I mean no harm to her, or to any of you." He looked directly at Arthur Prescott. "I will leave your land. I ask only that she not be punished for her compassion." Arthur's gaze flickered between Chayton and his daughter. He saw the raw determination in Clara's eyes, the quiet dignity in the Lakota warrior's stance. He saw the way they stood, not quite touching, but connected by an invisible thread of shared experience and, perhaps, something deeper. His certitude, usually so absolute, wavered for a fraction of a second. He was a hard man, but he was also a father. The sight of his daughter, willing to lay down her life for this man, shook him. He lowered his rifle slightly, though his expression remained grim. "Compassion for a viper can get you bit, Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. He turned his steely gaze back to Chayton. "You will leave. Now, if I ever see your face on my land again, or anywhere near my daughter, I will not hesitate." He gestured with his rifle towards the open plains. "Go. And don't look back." Walter Vance sputtered. "Mr. Prescott, you can't just let him." "Be silent, Walter." Arthur cut him off, his tone icy. "This is my land, and my decision." He looked at his men. "Lower your weapons." Reluctantly, they obeyed. Chayton held Clara's gaze for a long moment, a universe of unspoken words passing between them, gratitude, sorrow, a love that had bloomed in the most barren of soils. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a warrior's acknowledgment of her sacrifice. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, not towards the thickets where he might find easy cover, but out into the open prairie, his back straight, his head held high. He did not look back. Clara watched him go, tears blurring her vision until he was just a distant figure merging with the vastness of the land. A profound ache settled in her chest, a sense of loss so acute it stole her breath. But beneath the grief, a new strength had taken root. She had faced her father, defied the expectations of her world, and stood for what she believed was right. She was no longer the same girl who had ridden out in search of solitude. The aftermath was tense and quiet. Arthur Prescott did not speak to Clara on the ride back to the ranch house, nor for several days after. His silence was a heavy blanket, suffocating and accusatory. Walter Vance, humiliated and furious, made it clear he considered Clara tainted, her actions incomprehensible. He soon stopped visiting the Prescott ranch altogether, a development Clara met with quiet relief. The ranch hands whispered among themselves, their glances a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Clara retreated into herself, but it was a different kind of solitude now. It was not born of loneliness, but of a newfound understanding of her own heart. She carried the memory of Chayton like a precious, secret flame. She often found her fingers tracing the outline of the small wooden falcon he had carved for her, which she kept hidden in her sewing box. It was a tangible link to a man who had shown her that courage and kindness could exist beyond the narrow confines of her world. Her relationship with her father was forever changed. The unquestioning obedience was gone, replaced by a guarded respect on both sides. Arthur never spoke of Chayton again, but sometimes Clara would catch him looking at her with a strange, contemplative expression, as if he were still trying to understand the woman his daughter had become. He did not try to force another suitor upon her. Perhaps he sensed it would be futile. Clara found a new purpose in her days. She devoted more time to her garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil with a fierce tenderness. She read the few books she possessed with a new hunger for knowledge of the world beyond the ranch. The plains no longer seemed merely empty. They held the echo of Chayton's presence, the memory of a forbidden love that had, for a brief incandescent time, bridged the chasm between two disparate souls. She knew she might never see him again, but he lived on within her, a symbol of resilience, of a connection that defied prejudice, a testament to the unexpected kindness that could blossom even in the harshest of terrains. Far away, Chayton journeyed on, his body healed, his spirit irrevocably touched. The memory of Clara's courage, her compassion, was a beacon in the often dark landscape of his existence. She had shown him that not all Wasichu were driven by hatred and greed. Her kindness had planted a seed of hope in him, a belief that perhaps, somewhere, understanding between their peoples was not an impossible dream. He carried her image in his heart, a soft counterpoint to the harsh realities he faced. He was a Lakota warrior, his path uncertain, his future unknown, but he was no longer entirely alone. He carried the warmth of a rancher's daughter's love, a love born on the embattled plains, a love that, like the prairie wind, could not be contained by fences or fear. The land itself seemed to remember their story, whispering it through the rustling grasses, a poignant tale of resilience, acceptance, and the enduring power of the human heart to connect, even across the deepest divides.